What's up guys, welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, we're gonna have 3 anglers from 3 different regions of the country share their top spinnerbait fishing tips for fall bass fishing. Let's get into it.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. Today we're gonna give you guys some really good tips and advice on how to fish spinnerbaits on the western lakes in the country in the fall time of the year. And this is one of my favorite ways to fish. The fall time of the year is all about spinnerbait fishing. There's a lot of different ways you can fish spinnerbaits in the fall time of the year, depending upon the characteristic of the lake you're on, the water clarity, the structure, that type of stuff. But when we're talking about western lakes, it's a real specific situation, and it's one of my favorite ways to fish a spinnerbait. Most western lakes right now, they're going through a drought, and a lot of them are low. And a lot of your western lakes, whether it be, some of the California lakes or lakes like Lake Powell and Lake Mead and Lake Havasu, that type of stuff, they're sort of a desert environment, and there's not a lot of cover. It's sort of like sandy, hilly, small rock, that type of stuff, traditionally clear water situations, and a mix of species. Some of the lakes will have a smallmouth, spotted bass, largemouth mix, and it just varies for that. This makes for some really good spinnerbait fishing. The number one technique for my style of fishing, or spinnerbait fishing in my opinion, in the fall in the western lakes, is burning a small spinnerbait. And what we're talking about is sort of like your small spinnerbait, like this Mega Bass SV3, something like a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce, that have small little willow leaf blades on it, like number 2 and number 3 willow leaves. And you can actually retrieve this bait just like an inch under the surface or so, almost creating a wake behind the bait. Now this is one of the most effective ways to catch bass in clear water. So what I like to do is I like to get out and I look for low light conditions early in the morning. Look for banks that have shade on them where you can burn that spinnerbait on the shade. That's a really key element as far as catching bass in western lakes on spinnerbaits in the fall. Wind helps. If you have a combination of low light conditions, whether it be from shade or from clouds, with a combination of wind, like a 10 to 20 mile an hour wind, you have an ideal situation to catch bass on burning a little spinnerbait like that. Most of the time I concentrate on points, main or secondary points, just fan cast all over the point. The fish can be anywhere between 2 foot of water to over 20 foot of water, depending upon your clarity. And the other thing I like to do is just get down steeper banks, make long casts parallel with that spinnerbait down the steeper banks, and try to target that 2 to 10 foot of water, just keeping that bait moving pretty fast. A couple different tips on this is what you want to do is, as soon as that spinnerbait, you want to make a long cast with it first of all, because clear water spinnerbait fishing, it's all about the distance. So make the longest cast that you can and get that spinnerbait moving as soon as it hits the water. Don't let it sink down. So engage your reel just a second before that spinnerbait hits the water and start burning it right off the bat. And I don't mean like as fast as you can crank it, but burn it where the bait stays no more than like 2 to 3 inches underneath the surface. You don't have to be creating an actual wake with the spinnerbait, but you want to sort of be where it's almost creating a wake. That's when those fish will come up and just hammer it like a topwater lure. Most of the time I'm fishing it on a 7-foot rod so I can get the distance. I'm usually using 15 to 17 pound test fluorocarbon line. Gives you the ability to have some strength, and you can make a long distance cast with it. And also guys, you just want to definitely use the translucent shad type skirts on there. You'll get a lot more bites in that clear water. So anyway guys, give it a try. It's almost like topwater fishing. It's one of the most exciting ways to catch fish. I've caught bass up to 9 pounds on this technique. It's a great way to catch them, especially once that water temperature starts to get into the 60s and the 50s. So hope it helps you guys catch a few.
Next, I'm going to talk about how to fish spinnerbaits offshore on highland and lowland reservoirs with shad. There are a ton of highland and lowland reservoirs across the country. Basically any lake that has a dam on it that also has creeks is going to be a great place to throw a spinnerbait offshore in the fall. The reason that spinnerbait works great on these highland and lowland impoundments is that it imitates baitfish, which is going to be the primary forage on most of these lakes. The shad are going to be moving back into the creeks in the fall, and the bass are going to follow them. The bass tend to suspend a lot of times in the fall around offshore pieces of cover, like standing timber, brush piles, rock piles, even off the end of docks. Basically, the bass will be setting up in, let's say, 5 to 15 feet of water, suspended over 20 to 30 feet of water. Now you can catch these fish on swim baits and a lot of other baits, but a lot of times I find that I can get bigger bites and also get more bites by throwing a spinnerbait offshore. A lot of these spinnerbaits will have a double willow leaf setup like this War Eagle Screaming Eagle spinnerbait, and I just find that I have a lot of great success in the fall with a spinnerbait in general offshore, and I don't really throw a spinnerbait offshore that much other times of the year. I throw this Screaming Eagle spinnerbait in this mouse color when I'm in clear water, let's say 3+ feet of visibility. And the reason I like it is because it has smaller blades on it and it has a compact profile, but it has a 3/4 ounce weight. This allows it to sink a little bit deeper and allows me to work it in that 8 to 15 foot range really effectively. If you have cloudy skies and a windy day, this is probably my #1 go-to option offshore in the fall, and I've caught some giant fish on this over the years. Now, if I'm going to a lake that is a little bit more stained or has bigger bait fish, I'll also throw a little bit heavier spinnerbait with a bigger blade. This is a Strike King bottom dweller spinnerbait in the 1 3/8 ounce size. I'm pairing that with a size 8 Hildebrandt willow leaf blade. I actually cut off the second blade that comes stock with the spinnerbait, and I sometimes will run this double willow leaf combination with that big size 8 blade if I'm fishing in, let's say, 4 to 8 feet of water. But if I'm trying to fish a little bit deeper, I'll cut off that second blade and just have a single willow leaf on there and that little bit heavier spinnerbait head, that 1 3/8 size. And the reason you need such a heavy spinnerbait is because that blade lifts the spinnerbait really high in the water column as you reel it, so you need a heavy spinnerbait to keep it down. Again, I'm fishing this bait in 8 to 15, maybe even down to 20 feet of water. Whenever there's big gizzard shad in your lake, or just really big forage in general, that bigger willow leaf will generate bigger bites, and a lot of times it's one of the few ways I can get these suspended, inactive bass in the fall to actually bite. As far as my retrieve with this deep water spinnerbait, all I'm going to do is cast it out, let it sink down for 5 to 10 seconds to get it to depth, then slowly reel that spinnerbait in, barely turning that reel handle. Every once in a while, I might stop the spinnerbait and then burn it a couple times. I might twitch my rod a couple times to get those blades to flutter and give it just some irregular motion every once in a while. A lot of times with that big spinnerbait, it'll cause it to dive and flutter. With the smaller spinnerbait and the double willow leaf blades, the blades will clock together and give it a really nice action. In terms of my equipment with these spinnerbaits, when I'm throwing the really heavy spinnerbait with the big blade, I'm pairing that on a 7'6", heavy power, fast action Denali Covert Light worm and jig rod. I'm going to be putting 16-pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon on here with a 6:3-to-1 gear ratio Black Max reel. For the smaller spinnerbait, I'm going to be going with a little bit lighter setup just because the spinnerbait's not as heavy, it's just a 3/4 ounce. And I'll pair that on a 7'2", medium heavy power, fast action Covert Light rod by Denali. And I'm going to be pairing that with 12-pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon and their 6:3-to-1 gear ratio Black Max reel. All the gear is going to be linked down in the description, guys, so check that out. Now on to the next angler. Really quick, if you're struggling to find productive areas on your lake or are new to fishing and want to get pointed in the right direction about where to start fishing, head to our website, fishthemoment.com, and go to our lake breakdowns page. Here you'll find lake breakdowns from myself, Randy Blaukat, and Matt Stefan. I focus on offshore breakdowns, Matt covers smallmouth, and Randy covers shallow water largemouth. These lake breakdowns provide 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder. We give detailed area descriptions, the best conditions to fish each area, lure recommendations, and key strategies for the lake in general. We also give you a guide on how to transfer the waypoints straight to your fish finder, so you don't have to worry about the technology gap there. You can scroll through and find breakdowns for all 4 seasons of the year, and we have a lot of lakes here, so you probably will find most of the major lakes in this list already. However, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom and don't see your lake in one of the 4 seasons, you can also get a personal lake breakdown from either Randy or Matt at the bottom of the page, and you can pick any lake in the country and get 40 waypoints picked out personally by Matt or Randy. Check out our lake breakdowns at fishthemoment.com.
No matter where you're at in the fall, a spinnerbait is a phenomenal bait to throw during the fall. Up here in the North Country, it works just as good as it does for the guys down south. In fact, I think it may actually be better. There are a lot of things that a spinnerbait can do that other baits can't do, which makes it so versatile. And in the fall period, especially prior to turnover, you're talking about being able to fish from shallow water to very deep, and therefore a spinnerbait fits the bill really well. You can slow roll it in 20 feet of water. You can burn it in 4 feet of water if you want. So it's something that allows an angler to be very versatile on the water with relatively few baits. Now, there are some things I think you need to be looking for. The first is, if you're talking about water temps that are in the low 60s to upper 50-degree range, you're prior to turnover, and therefore you're gonna have a lot of fish that are roaming the flats. They're actively feeding, they're still gonna be in that shallower water, trying to take advantage of the water that's a little bit warmer than the deeper water. So a spinnerbait is a great bait to cover water. The key pieces of targets that you're gonna be looking for are clumps of green weeds, docks, any other form of hard target like a lay down tree, a stump, and rock transitions. Those are going to be great pieces of cover to fish regardless of bass species. Largemouth and smallmouth will be using these areas. When I'm fishing on the flats, I like to go with a more compact spinnerbait, specifically an all chartreuse one like this. I love to burn it around the flats, especially if there's smallmouth in the lake, but largemouth will hit it too. This is the new Berkley compact spinnerbait. It's the all chartreuse model. And if you're fishing around smallmouth, there's nothing better to agitate those fish into biting than an all chartreuse bait. Now, if I'm fishing deeper, that's when I'll go with a heavier spinnerbait, and I'll start slow rolling it around some of those outside weed lines on your points and on some of your, if you've got some road beds or some rock transitions, which are gonna be your travel routes for the fish to go from those shallow flats to deeper water. Another prime location to fish is your rivers like I've got behind me. The rivers are going to be great places to fish during the fall period because you're still going to have a good portion of the fish that are either going to be sitting completely out of the current in the form of largemouth, or the smallmouth will be sitting in the normal eddies and behind logs like they normally would be during the summer months. When that's the case, I like to go with a bait that I can retrieve at a much slower pace, because a spinnerbait that's got a slow moving bait allows me to present it and keep it in the strike zone longer for these fish that are really becoming a little bit more lethargic as the water temperature drops. So when that happens, I like to slow roll a Berkley spinnerbait with double Colorado blades. That allows me to move the bait at a much slower pace and keep it in the strike zone. So if I'm fishing on a river where I've got current that's trying to pull my bait away from that log or that rock or whatever that eddy is that I'm fishing, a double Colorado spinnerbait will allow me to retrieve that at a much slower pace and therefore keep it right in the strike zone. Those are two key factors for me anytime I'm fishing a spinnerbait in the fall. My spinnerbait gear is pretty basic. It's a 7.3 medium heavy fast action rod. This is an MHX blank that I built. It's the NMB 873. I matched that up with a faster gear ratio reel. This is an 8.3 to 1 Abu Garcia Revo ALF. And no matter if I'm fishing shallow or deep, I'm gonna have it on 15-pound, 100% Berkley fluorocarbon. I like the fluorocarbon because it gives me a lot of sensitivity, but it also helps keep my bait down because it does sink. One key fall spinnerbait tip for you is to use a spinnerbait that has a lot of additional flash. In this case, this is a fish head primal spin. It's got an underspin type blade on the belly of it. It creates more of that ball of shad look. And that's something that can generate those additional strikes, because this time of year, the fish are going to be looking for a little bit larger meal, and anything that's got some additional flash is going to make this stand out from other spinnerbaits. So give that a try.
And that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys learned some new tips about how to fish spinnerbaits in the fall. If you enjoyed, leave a like down below, and also leave us a comment letting us know what your favorite tip from this video was. Thanks again for checking out this one. We'll see you guys in the next Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube video coming soon.